Okay, so today we are looking at 2023 May June multiple choice, obviously, component 12. So we start from the bottom. We're going to start off with a pretty difficult question actually. So country X has a persistent deficit on their current account. So the thing about the deficit is we're asked to improve the deficit. That means that what we need to do is we need to make our exports up and imports down, or as long as exports go up more than imports. So for the policy measures, we'll start at the bottom. If you lower export subsidies, that means that you're giving less money to the companies in your country, so they are going to export less. That would not improve a current account deficit, it would actually increase a current account deficit. Okay. In this case here, if we lower income tax, what that's going to do is that's going to give people more money for spending. That might direct some spending towards the domestic market, not exports or imports, but it also is likely to allow people to import more rather than export. As people get more money, they generally buy more imports. So we're left between quotas and tariffs, okay? Now if we lower import tariffs, what that's going to do is that's actually going to make us import more, because we are reducing the tax that people have to pay on imports. So it's going to increase the quantity of imports that come into a country. So correct answer is A and Y. If we lower import quotas, and I'll give you an example here. Let's say that the quota for cars is 40 and now the quota goes to 20. What we're doing is we're essentially releasing, or we're stopping the restriction on the quotas, right? So in this case, if we lower the quotas, it may allow us to actually export more. So some of the policies may improve it, but lowering import quotas is the one that is most likely to affect it. And by lowering the quotas, we're getting rid of those restrictions, or we're lessening them. Okay, what would increase the demand for a country's currency on the foreign market? So an increase in its imports definitely wouldn't, because people in our country would be buying more of the currency in the other country. Correct answer here is C. If we increase our exports, that means that people in other countries are going to be buying more of our currency, because they're going to need to pay for it in our currency. A decrease in the rate of inward investment and a decrease in the rate of interest, they will both result in less demand for our currency. Okay, now why? There's less investment coming in, there's less companies coming into our country and setting up, so this means that there's going to be less flow or less demand from those multinational companies for our currency, because they're not going to set up their business in our currency. And decreasing the rate of interest is going to have the same effect. If we increase our rate of interest, then that means that people who are living in other countries, they may want to store their money in our country's bank accounts. So that would increase the demand. But if we decrease the rate of interest, they will move their money from our bank accounts to other countries. So it will decrease the demand. Okay, question 28. Country X exports steel to country Y at a price below its cost of production. So straight away we know that it's dumping. This has led to a fall in demand for steel produced in country Y. What is a method of trade protection that country Y could use to reduce the imports of steel from country X? Okay, so like I said previously, if we apply anti-dumping tariffs, that will stop that. The clue is in the question. You look over your specialization trade chapter, free trade, etc. When they export below their cost of production, it's a process called dumping. They want to get rid of their surplus, essentially. So they'll send it all to our country where people can buy very cheap, and then that will affect the domestic companies in our own country. Revaluing currency, subsidizing export of steel, and increasing interest rates is not going to reduce the imports. So subsidizing steel will increase exports, but it's not going to necessarily reduce the imports of steel. Revaluing currency and increasing interest rates will have the same effect. So anti-dumping, because of the clue that's in the question given here. Okay, very similar, almost the same as the question from question paper 11, May-June 2023. Okay, table shows a country's exports and imports. What was the country's balance of trade in goods and services? So this is from our current account balance of payments chapter, unit 6. Slides and revision notes available. When we calculate balance of trade in goods and services, it's split into two parts. First, it's split into the goods, which are here, exports and imports of goods, and then it's split into the services, exports and imports of services. So it's very simple. We just take these two for the balance of trade in goods first. Exports is 200 minus our imports, which is 190. That would give us a balance of plus 10. And our balance of trade in services then, export services 35, imports of services 38. So we're left with minus 3 as our balance. So our balance would be 7. So we calculate goods separately, services separately, and then add the two sums. And that would be, in this case, oh, I nearly put a deficit there. That would be a surplus of 7 million. Okay, 26. What is not a reason for the decline in manufacturing industries in developed economies in recent years? Okay, so growth of newly industrialized competitor countries. That would result in the decline, because it means that other countries would get more competitive, so it may reduce our level of exports, etc., and it may result in people importing the manufactured goods from other countries instead of our own. Rising costs of factor inputs in the steel industry. Similarly, that would not decline the manufacturing industry. Steel is a separate industry in itself. It is not the whole of the manufacturing industry, right? So what it may do is it may result in a decline in the steel industry or in other industries that are associated with steel, but it would not decline all of manufacturing itself. That covers a very large amount of goods. Considerable skill shortages as school leavers prefer to work in the service sector is also not applicable. The invention of automated production methods, that is the one that will not be a reason for the decline in manufacturing industries. Why? Because the invention of automated production methods, that would result in us becoming more productive rather than less productive. So not a reason why we would decline. In this case here, the steel industry would result in a decline of manufacturing industries. Apologies for that. I wasn't looking at it properly. Because the steel industry would affect manufacturing. It's a large component of it. And skill shortages would result in a decline as well, as people would go to work in the service sector instead of going to work in the manufacturing industry. So we'd have less labour available. Okay, question 25. The Peruvian government sets itself the target of reducing the number of its population in poverty. What change does not indicate that the Peruvian government has made progress. So essentially we're looking for the three that do indicate progress. A rise in employment would definitely result in progress for reducing poverty. A rise in life expectancy would also, and so would a rise in the rate of adult literacy. More people can read and write, education is better, we would expect that less people would be in poverty. Whereas if we have more infant mortality, which is more babies dying, then we would expect that that's not an indicator that they've made progress for reducing or eradicating poverty. Question 24. During a recession, many people in a city become unemployed, okay, and their incomes fall. So the income goes down and they lose their jobs. Some people can no longer pay the rent on their houses or buy the food that they need. What is the effect of the recession in this city? Okay, so first thing we need to answer here is if they can't pay the rent in their houses or buy the food that they need, that's going to be absolute poverty, okay, because they can't afford the basic necessities that they require. So straight away we know that it can either be A or B. So we can take out C and D. And in this case, if you think about it this way, if absolute poverty increases, then relative poverty also has to increase. It's a recession. And if people can't pay the rent on their houses or buy the food that they need, and, as we're told here, that their incomes fall, well, that means that relative poverty is also going to take place. So they're going to feel relatively poorer in comparison to how much money they had previously, or in comparison to other people around them. Okay, diagram shows Italy's unemployment rate and GDP per head. When do Italy's unemployment rate and GDP per head rise at the same time? Okay, so 2000, 2001, we can see here quite clearly that this is going down, not going up, so we can take that out straight away. 2007, 2008, that's around here for unemployment rate, and that's around here for GDP per head. So they're both going up, so the answer will be B. If you look at 2009, 2010, unemployment rate is rising, but it's coming down for GDP per head. And 2014, 2015, it's coming down for GDP per head, and it's coming down here as well for unemployment rate. So 2007, 2008 is the only period where it's rising. Question 22. What is a likely consequence of a falling level of unemployment? Okay, now bear with me, I'm extremely tired today. So falling level of unemployment means that more people are going to have a job because there's less people being unemployed. And how is that going to affect the economy? Okay, so really it's very simple. If more people are having a job, does that mean that poverty is going to increase? No, absolutely not. We would have a decrease in absolute poverty. We would have a decrease in welfare benefit payments because there's less people unemployed, so the government have to pay out less money. So we're left between downward pressure on wage rates or rise in income tax revenue. Okay, now in this case, the likely consequence is that we'll get more tax revenue as more people have jobs. Downward pressure on wage rates could apply in certain circumstances, but it's unlikely. As unemployment continues to fall, it's likely that our GDP is increasing at the same time, our output, etc. People may be pushing for wage increases instead. Okay, 21. The table shows real GDP in US dollars per billion for a country over a 3-year period. What does the GDP data indicate for the country between year 1 and year 3? So we can see 205 billion in year 1, 215 and 219. So does it indicate a reduction in the rate of inflation? That can't be the correct answer. It doesn't tell us anything about inflation, it only tells us about real GDP. Increase in the rate of economic growth, that's also wrong, because between year 1 and 3 we increased by 10 billion here, but we only increased by 4 billion here. So we've actually had a decrease in the rate of economic growth between year 1 and year 3. Does it show there's an existence of economic growth? Absolutely. And why? Because each year our real GDP is increasing. And it does not show the existence of economic growth per capita. It doesn't give the figures per capita. It gives the figures for the whole country. So we don't know what real GDP per capita is here. That's something they'd have to provide. That's per person per capita. That's what that means. Okay, the government of country Z announces an increase in spending on workplace training. What is the effect of this supply side policy likely to be? Okay, so a decrease in their employment rate? Absolutely not. Supply side policy, in the future it may increase the employment rate depending on whether we're able to move AD at the same time, but it's definitely going to shift AS to the right in the long run. So we'd expect our productive potential to increase. Increase in the exchange rate? No. Not going to have an effect on that. Increase in the interest rate? No. It's a supply side policy. It's not a monetary policy. But it will, in the future, hopefully, have an increase in their economic growth rate. It's going to increase their productive potential, as well as in the short run, it may be an increase in government spending, so it may move AD to the right. Long run, it will shift AS. And if AD moves to the right, then we know that that's an economic growth increase, because we'll be able to increase our level of real GDP. Okay, which people are most likely to gain at a time of inflation? So again, very similar to question paper 11. This will be those who are repaying borrowed money. Okay, those living on savings, they're not going to benefit from inflation because their money will be left in the bank, and every day their money is left in there. When we have inflation, it's losing its value. Companies who sell abroad will not benefit from it, because the price of their exports are likely to increase due to the fact that prices are going to increase in their own country. So they'll have to sell at a higher price in another country, which may reduce the amount of exports they can sell. And foreign tourists are definitely not going to benefit, because they're going to have to pay more when they come to our country, due to the fact that everything is getting more expensive in our country with inflation. Okay, question 18. What is the most likely reason to increase government subsidies? Okay, so this is relating to our merits and demerits, and it's pretty simple. When we have a merit, what we know is that we need to increase their consumption. So correct answer is B. To decrease consumption of a merit, that's obviously wrong. First of all, we wouldn't want to do that. Secondly, giving a subsidy or increasing government subsidies, it's going to shift supply to the right. So that will increase the quantity. And we will not use a subsidy for a demerit. A little quick summary for you. Demerits, we use indirect taxes because we want to reduce their consumption. And for merits, we use subsidies. So straight away we know that we should be able to take out the demerit goods. They won't be relevant unless we're talking about an indirect tax. And when we want to increase subsidies, it's to increase the consumption of a merit good. Okay, a government decides to leave direct taxes unchanged but to increase indirect taxes. What is this policy intended to achieve? Okay, so in this case, it will be intended to achieve reducing a budget deficit. Okay, why is that? If they tax less products individually, we may be able to increase our revenue from those products. Okay, why? If we increase the indirect taxes, people will have to pay more for certain products. Like for example, tobacco, or alcohol, which will be highly inelastic, so putting indirect taxes on them may allow us to increase our government revenue, which will reduce a budget deficit. Remember, budget deficit is government revenue versus government expenditure. If revenue goes up, our deficit is reduced, and if revenue goes down and expenditure goes up, a deficit is increased. So it's not going to redistribute income. That's what direct taxes are for, not indirect taxes. It's not going to increase or influence the exchange rate, and it's not going to reduce the rate of inflation. Reducing rate of inflation, we'd have to be using our fiscal or our monetary policies. Okay, question 16. What could cause internal diseconomies of scale for a firm? Okay, so remember that internal diseconomies are the ones that the firm is in control of. So straight away we can look for that. A fall in demand for the products produced by a firm, merger with another firm, spending more research and development, lack of skilled labour. So straight away you can cross out lack of skilled labour, geographical area. That's going to be an external effect, not internal. If they spend more on research and development to create new products, that's not going to cause diseconomies of scale. Okay, that may actually result in long-term economies of scale rather than diseconomies. So the correct answer here is B. A merger with another firm that results in slower decision making. That might result in internal diseconomies of scale, which, just to recap very briefly, that means that their average costs go up, right? So it's a bad thing for a business. And if they merge with another firm and they're making slower decisions, that might result in their cost of production or their average costs increasing. Fall in demand for the products produced by the firm. Sure, yeah, but we need to get more information on whether it's an internal or an external effect. That could be due to an external effect on the business. Okay, what's the definition of a firm's revenue? I'm not going to spend too long on this. It's very simple. Definition of a firm's revenue is the money that they receive from sales. Okay, it's not sales volume, because it's sales volume multiplied by the cost of the product that they sell, which is essentially the money that they receive. Surplus over costs and tax payments, no. Okay, what is not a variable cost of production? So they're basically asking us here, what we're looking for is, what is a fixed cost? Okay, and the only one that's going to be a fixed cost here is the rent of offices, because they'll pay the same rent every month for a 12-month period, for example. Cost of their raw materials, the cost of fuel that they pay, and the extra pay for working additional hours for staff, they will all be variable costs of production, because those amounts are going to change every month. You might have a worker working 10 hours of overtime this month and 20 hours of overtime next month. So next month we'd have to pay them more money than we paid them last month. And the cost of raw materials and the cost of fuel would constantly change depending on how the market is performing for those two. So question 13. Which trade union activity will be beneficial for firms? So which trade union activity is going to help the firms? So in this case it's pretty simple. Balloting for industrial action to prevent redundancies, that's not going to benefit a firm, is it? Because taking industrial action means that people will not be working, so their productivity will be decreased. Campaigning to raise wages of trade union members, sorry about my blue pen going all over the place here, it's hard to control. That's also not going to benefit a firm, obviously, because it will raise their costs of production. Instructing them to strike is essentially the same as the industrial action up here. They won't be working, so productivity will be down. But if a trade union provides training, which raises productivity, then the firm will be very happy, because that will allow them to be more productive and will benefit them. Okay, functions of money is something you can look over. Chapter on it is in Unit 3. It's very simple. You just have to learn these functions and learn the characteristics. Okay, there's nothing else really you can do with them. So what does it mean when we say it's a measure of value? If you apply your common sense even without learning them, you should be able to get this though. Measure of value means that it's used to compare the worth of different goods and services. Okay, so we can measure its value in relation to different things. It makes it easy for us to make comparisons. We can compare a chocolate bar that's 10 RMB versus a chocolate bar that's 100 RMB, and we can compare the worth of those two different chocolate bars based on their prices. Okay, question 11. Savers suffer as inflation rises to 4.4%. What function of money is most involved in this statement? Okay, now when we have inflation, money is a store of value. Again, you just have to look over your functions and characteristics of money. Means of deferred payment, medium of exchange, and unit of account are all relating to money for characteristics and functions, but just look over them. Store of value is the one where it will allow us to keep the value during a period of inflation. Of course, the value of our money will be going down, but that's its function that it performs during those times. Okay, a maximum price for a good is an example of which type of government policy? That would be regulation. Fiscal, if we remember, is using taxes, government spending. Monetary is interest rates, credit regulations, money supply, exchange rates, and supply side is a load of different things. Privatization, lowering income tax to try and attract more people to work, privatization, deregulation, investment in infrastructure, investment in education and training, etc. There's loads of different supply side policies. You can look over those again in the chapter on supply side policies in Unit 4. Regulation is minimum pricing, maximum pricing, etc. So it's them putting a regulation in place saying this is the maximum price that can be charged for this good or this service. Okay, price of a good increases. What would cause this? So what we need to think about here is with our demand and our supply. Okay, so I'm just going to say DNS. Draw a demand and a supply curve and figure out what needs to move, right? So in this case, if I just draw one here quickly and show you here, that's demand. I'm not going to label it. That's supply. I'll just label it quickly. So what would cause the price from this initial point to go up? Well, you can see here we have a number of different things. We could have supply shifting to the left, because if we draw a new line here, we'd have a higher price around this point. Or we can have demand shifting to the right, which will result in quantity going up and the price being higher. So, cost of raw material falls. That would mean that supply would go right, price of the product would go down. So it can't be that. Price of a substitute falls. That would mean that more people would want to buy the substitute, less people would want to buy our product, so demand would go left, price of the product would go down. And that's the same for price of a complement rises, demand would move left for us. So the correct answer, incomes of consumers rise, which is a factor that will shift demand. Demand will shift to the right, and the price of the product will increase. Okay, question 8. What might be an external benefit of an increase in the number of university graduates in an economy? So remember that an external benefit is a benefit that affects third parties. So they're not directly involved in the consumption or the production of whatever it is that we're mentioning. So anything mentioning university graduates, university, etc., that's not going to be an external benefit. That might be private benefits. So straight away we can get rid of A, C, and D. So it has to be B. Increase in tax revenue from a more productive labour force will affect everybody. That will affect people that were not involved in the university graduates increasing, or the number of university graduates increasing. So people who are not involved in that still get to benefit from it as a society or as an economy. Whereas all the others are directly relating to either the graduates themselves or the universities, which they would be involved in the production or the consumption of the number of university graduates. So we'd be talking about either private benefits or private costs there. Okay, question 7. The diagram shows the supply curve for coffee. The price of coffee increases from P1 to P2. How would this benefit firms in the coffee industry? So we've gone from this being our original price to this being our new price. How's that going to benefit companies that work in the coffee industry? So again, this should be fairly straightforward. A higher price gives firms the incentive to reduce total fixed costs. No, they're fixed costs for a reason. They can't be reduced, and higher prices don't incentivize them to reduce their fixed costs. It might incentivize them to reduce their variable costs if they can, but again, that's something that's hard to do, but not fixed costs. A higher price will encourage consumers to buy more coffee, increasing total revenue. That's not true. We know that a higher price does not necessarily mean that more people will want to buy the product. Higher price will encourage less firms to enter the market to supply coffee. That's not true. Instead of encouraging less firms, it will encourage more firms to enter the industry because they want to get the extra profit. So our correct answer is A. Higher price gives firms the ability to increase their profits. Okay, question 6. Which PED would cause an increase in total revenue if the price of the good goes up? Okay, so we should know our PED stuff by this stage. I'll just summarize it here very quickly. If it's elastic, price up, TR is total revenue. Price up, total revenue down. If it's elastic, price goes down, total revenue goes up. If it's inelastic, then it's a positive relationship. Price up, total revenue up. Price down, total revenue down. And if it is unitary, it doesn't matter. Price changes don't affect it. Total revenue will stay the same irregardless of price changes. So once we know these, we can just check it off. Price of the good goes up and total revenue goes up. So we can see here that it has to have been relatively inelastic. Okay, C. Okay, good X is demanded in two areas, Y and Z. The table shows the amount of X demanded in these areas at different prices. What can be concluded from the table? So, in this case, start at the bottom, there's more consumers living in area Y than area Z. We can't conclude that from the table. We've shown the quantity demanded, we're not shown the population. Consumers in area Y want the good more than consumers in area Z. Again, it's possible to conclude that because of the demand, but again, that can be relative. There could be a population 5 times the size in area Y or 6 times the size. So maybe per capita they don't want it more than area Z. Consumers in area Y are richer. Again, we can't really determine that from the table. It may be true, but we can't determine it because we're not given what their income per capita is. So we don't know if they actually have more money, or if it's just a product that's maybe harder to get in area Y, therefore the demand is higher. What we can conclude is that consumers in area Y are more willing and able, and that's kind of your key here, your clue, because you know your definition of demand is willing and able to buy a product. So if it's quantity demanded, we should be looking for that terminology. More willing and able than consumers in area Z to buy the goods. Okay, what is an example of a macroeconomic indicator for question 4? That would be real GDP. Why? Just think about it. Every time you draw your AD and your S curves, how do you label them? So I just put AS here. Then the other one would obviously be AD. You put real GDP down here. And we study that in macroeconomics unit 4. Remember, units 1 to 3 are all micro topics. Units 4, 5 and 6 are all macro. So price level and real GDP. Average earnings in secondary sector, agricultural prices, and the total costs of German pharmaceutical firms, they're all micro economic indicators. Okay, question 3. A government spends 100 million on subsidizing wind farm construction instead of spending it on an increase in healthcare. Which economic concept does this spending decision illustrate? Okay, does it illustrate external cost? No. External cost is the cost of third parties of doing something, and they would be generated from demerits, etc., but not from subsidizing wind farm construction, because that's a good thing that happens. Is it free goods? No. There's factors of production used, hence the reason why we're spending money on it. Market disequilibrium? Absolutely not. We're not told anything about demand and supply. It doesn't illustrate disequilibrium to us. It does illustrate opportunity cost, because they spent it on wind farm construction instead of spending it on an increase in healthcare. And remember, your definition of opportunity cost is the cost of the next best alternative that is foregone. And in this case, the next best alternative that is foregone would be spending the 100 million on healthcare. Okay, question 2, PPC shift to the right. So straight away, before we even look at education, investment and unemployment, when the PPC shifts to the right, what we should be remembering is that it is from anything that results in an increase in the quantity and or the quality of resources. Okay, so let's look at this table here. Lower unemployment, what that would do is that would move us from inside a curve onto a curve, okay, or certainly if not on, closer to being on, because we would be using more resources, okay, but it does not result in a shift, so we know that this one has to be false. Investment and education, they would both increase the quantity and or the quality of resources. Education would affect the labour, give them more skills, more quality from that perspective, and investment might increase the quantity because we're able to create, for example, more factories, or able to get more capital equipment. So those two would both be true. Last one would be false. We would be looking at D. Okay, and question 1, to finish off, what is the part of the economic definition of scarcity? That's unlimited consumer wants. So if you remember, first chapter, definition of scarcity, or the basic economic problem, limited resources equals unlimited wants, equals choice, equals opportunity cost, equals scarcity, etc. Okay? You can look over that in Unit 1. It's the first chapter, the first thing we study. So all these questions for the first ones are very similar. And that is that.